Who am I?
Richard Kazimer, media veteran.
Why I got in radio is because I'm good with a knife.
Contributor in Perth, Australia.
Our friend Richard Kazimer in the United States.
How are you guys enjoying the 19th century? Is that working out for you? How can you say, I'm not making fun of you as a race, I'm making fun of you as black performers?
I think as a country, Americans are as patriotic as the most rabid UK football hooligan.
Who am I?
Richard S. Kazimer. From our US Hot Topics man, who is Richard Kazimer. Richard has worked in broadcasting in the United States and has done other jobs far too numerous to mention, has even been in Perth at some point, doing aquaculture of all sorts of things. So he's definitely been around a bit, Richard.
Yes, I have, and I promise you in this segment, I will do my best to offer my expertise, such as it is, and what I don't know, I'll make up as usual.
Plenty of other people do that. I mean, look at politicians. Speaking of politicians, I guess one of the big things in the US at the moment, and in some respects, I suppose, it's a bit hard for Australians, especially those who haven't had any sort of integration or in any way been involved in the US health system. It's a bit hard for them to understand. The big healthcare plan, which President Obama is very, very keen to see get off the ground. One of the key issues that's always been a dominant factor in the United States is firstly the cost of health insurance and the fact that many so-called middle-class people just simply can't afford it.
That's correct. We don't have a national healthcare system in this country, much like Canada, the UK, Australia. All insurance is by private companies, and if your workplace doesn't provide you insurance or doesn't help defray the cost of your insurance, you're stuck. Americans have to pay for their own insurance to get coverage. 45,000 people a year die as a direct result of lack of health insurance, and that's the key issue. It's usually a key issue in any administration. President Clinton tried to put through a national health care plan, and that failed. It was a key part of Obama's campaign platform, and he's trying very hard to get some sort of national health care program going. The polls show that Americans want it. They want a single-pay health care, a government-supplied health care, but the Republicans, Obama being a Democrat, the Republicans are staunchly against it because they represent the big insurance companies.
Well, of course, the big insurance companies are the ones who, I suppose, to a certain extent, control all the muscle, and also, I suppose, by indirect implication, also have the potential to influence some votes. How is this liable to go?
It's a tough road to hoe because what is happening is Obama feels that by having private insurance still will exist. This is not to put any of the insurance companies out of business. What he's trying to do is to make them competitive. Right now, insurance companies can raise their rates whenever they want without any sort of restriction. They can also drop a customer at any time they want for no reason. They can also deny you coverage for pre-existing conditions. What he's trying to do is to get what is called a public option, that if you decide not to go with a private insurance company, that you can go with the public option, which is supported by the U.S. government.
So are you telling me, in effect, what this amounts to is the government's going in competition with what you call the HMOs? God, no wonder they're going berserk about it.
Well, the thing is, you go back to how many people perish each year because of lack of insurance, and also the number one cause of bankruptcies in this country is due to a health care problem. People are one serious illness away from total bankruptcy.
Yeah, well, see, I also understand that one of the other problems is that you might develop a condition and you might need ongoing treatment. Say, for example, if you get treatment for, say, chemotherapy for cancer, the insurance, even if you've got insurance, the insurance may not necessarily cover you for the entire treatment that you need, and you could be faced with the decision of, do I continue with the chemotherapy and potentially leave my family destitute if it doesn't work? And you actually have to make a decision like that.
That happens all the time, and that's one of the key problems, is that insurance companies can decide mid-treatment that they no longer will cover that treatment anymore, or discontinue your coverage altogether. The insurance company, whether it's health insurance or auto insurance or homeowners insurance, is all a numbers game. The insurance companies are hoping that you never collect. And when you do collect, particularly for people who are 55 and older, who are more susceptible to hospitalization, it becomes a burden and it cuts into their profit margin. The insurance companies don't want to pay out for benefits.
So you're hearing what you're saying about some of the things that insurance companies can do, such as deciding that they're going to discontinue treatment mid-term and all that sort of stuff. Why aren't there regulations in place that stop them from doing that?
There are a huge lobby, senators and congresspeople who live where the insurance companies are based out of, They're courted by the insurance companies. So the insurance companies are a huge lobby here in the United States, and they also control and dominate the industry. There's just a handful, maybe 3, 4 insurance companies that insure pretty much 90% of all Americans anyways. They call the shots, and Obama is taking them down.
Now, what chance do you think this has of succeeding? I mean, of course, a lot of things, when you have these ideas that some people think are great, often there can be a vast canyon between an idea being mooted and an idea actually coming to reality, even though it's gone through several stages. What's the chances of it actually becoming law, do you reckon?
I think it will happen. The majority of Americans do want some sort of nationalized or public option or single-payer health care plan. And if they don't get it, they are going to vote out any incumbent senator or congressperson or president unless they get it. This is not a party issue. This is an issue that affects all Americans. If you're a Democrat, you're not getting a public option or a national health care policy in effect. Voters will vote you out, and they don't care if they put in a Republican. They want that. It's not a yes or no whether people want a health care plan or not. They want it. They just want people to get it done now.
Are you absolutely certain that that people generally feel about that? Because you kind of think that if people really did feel about that, it's something that they would have been able to get through a lot sooner.
I think that people become complacent. If you're happy with your coverage, it's not something that you really look at. If you don't have a condition and you don't use your insurance, then it's all fine. It comes out of your paycheck if you're covered. You just don't think about it. But when you need it, then it becomes a problem. And here's a like-that scenario.
Yeah. Moving right along, we've had some issues, of course, across our summer months here in the southern hemisphere, bearing in mind that you're in your winter at the moment, with arsonists setting things like bushfires, what you call wildfires in the United States. Something that people often look at is the way that different areas deal with these sort of issues. For arson, people who set wildfires in the United States, generally what sort of penalties do they face if they're caught?
There's serious charges, and you have to understand, with as much wild or forest land and prairie land that we have in the United States, arson is still kind of a difficult crime to charge people with. Nationally, only about 10% of arson fires yield any sort of charges. And
well, that would be the same anywhere, I suppose, because it's very hard to catch people.
Well, when they catch them, you can start piling on state and federal charges, because a lot of times these areas are national forests or national wildlife refuge, which is controlled by the federal government. So you've got a state arson charge and then a federal charge. And these things are federal crimes. These are felonies. It's not unusual to see people being charged $500,000 for the initial arson, and then you start adding on all the prison time. 10 years, 25 years is nothing. Depending on the age of the person, too, even as a juvenile, there's a case in Los Angeles pending where a 13-year-old boy started a 2,100-acre fire, and he's going to be spending, until he's 25, now mind you, he's 13 years old, until he's 25, he's in a juvenile facility. Once he gets out, he can then be charged again and put into a federal penitentiary.
What is liable to happen? Is that liable to happen, or by the time he reaches 25, do you think they'll be satisfied that he's done his time, so to speak?
It'll depend on the judge. If he's a first-time offender, possibly. The other thing, too, is that if people have psychological issues, rather than being put in jail, they can be put in mental institutions for an extended period of time. So once caught, arsonists don't get a slap on the wrist. This is a serious crime. We don't see a lot of the faces of the arsons in this country. It's not, for example, like a serial killer. Although people do die, unfortunately, too many people die in an arson wildfire, whether it's from a heart attack or a burn or careening off a gully with people going to put out the fire. So there are murder charges that are added to these crimes as well.
All right. Just finally, Richard, we have in the United States this year what you call the midterms, which basically means an election that's held in the presidential midterm, I guess. That's how it certainly appears from where we stand. Why aren't all the elections sort of held together? What's the idea of the midterms?
The bars couldn't handle it. Usually people do a lot of drinking during the election, so I don't think the bars can handle everybody being elected at the same time. But seriously, the midterm elections coming up in 2010 in November, there's 100 Senate seats up for grabs, and 36, well actually there's 100 Senate seats, so 2 senators from each of the 50 states. 36 of those seats are up for the midterm elections. The remainder will be up for the 2012 elections. And there's also 36 governor's races. Each state has its own governor. Some terms are 4-year terms. Some terms are 6-year terms. There are 2-year terms as well. So that you can't do them all at once. So to have them all done at once, you just have a huge mess every election cycle.
Yeah, I would imagine that for some people it would also become just a little bit too hard to manage, especially as you've got different terms. I mean, I guess if everybody was 3 years or everybody was 4 years, it might be a lot easier, but what you're telling me is that it varies from different groups.
The attention span of the average voter is pretty limited too. I mean, that's why it's so much easier that if you have two parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, but if then you have a third or a fourth party like the Green Party or Libertarian or somebody like that, your eyes glaze over. And then people have a tendency not to go to the polls if there are too many issues anyway.
The other interesting point is, what sort of a barometer are these midterms to gauge whether a president is or isn't doing a good job? Or is it something that really isn't much of a barometer because, of course, the president's only halfway through his term?
That's a good point, and we've had a recent election here in Massachusetts, a special election to fill the vacant seat left by the late Ted Kennedy, who had 2 years remaining on his term. There was a very popular Democratic candidate in Martha Coakley, the state's attorney general, a great track record on being an attorney general, and Scott Brown, a Republican who was virtually unknown, although he was in politics. Martha Coakley was a shoo-in until the last 10 days of the election, and she was very complacent in her campaigning, thought it was a lock, and she lost. So now the Republicans and the Tea Party, which is another thing we'll get into at another time, are all rallied around Scott Brown and said that this is a rallying cry, that they're going to throw the bumps out, and the Republicans have the Democrats on the run. But it's not. I think the Republicans are dreaming if they think that they're going to win a clear majority in November. It's not. I think that if the voters go to the polls, they're going to vote their pocketbook. It gets back to the key issues, which is jobs and health care. Whether you're a Democrat or Republican, you better step up to the plate and start answering and listening to what the constituents want and not about your own re-election. It's a horse race, but that's what makes politics so much fun to watch.
Would never be so much fun to be in it, though.
This is true.
Richard, as always, thank you very much, and we shall talk to you again shortly.
All right, brother. Go Dockers.